He said he had sex with the bodies. We were unaware of that until he told us. We didn't know. No way to tell.
The Green River Killer terrorized Seattle for almost 20 years, murdering 49 women and teens.
I poked him with my finger in his chest. I says, "You SOB, I know you did it, and we're going to get you one of these days."
Hi, I'm Nick from True Crime Uncut. Welcome to Questions With. This week we're speaking to homicide detectives Frank Atchley and Robert LaMoria about how they unmasked one of America's deadliest serial killers, Gary Ridgway.
He's sitting there, he's watching, and he has got this smirk on his face, like we're not going to find anything. He thought that he had covered his tracks pretty well, and he had it at that point. But in my mind, I was convinced he was the killer. In 1982, we were finding victims 2 or 3 times a week during certain periods of time during the investigation.
We had victims that were missing for over 2 years, had never been reported missing. So it made it easy for Mr. Ridgway to get away with it because we were sometimes 2 and 3 years behind him.
These women were in the area of Pacific Highway South, and that's where he would make contact with them and abduct them. And that was the common denominator between the victims, the location and where they were abducted. Right now we're next to the Green River in King County, Washington, and this is really where it all started. The news media, because of the Green River, they labeled the murders as the Green River murders.
The first victim apparently floated down the river and got tangled up in some brush and the rocks, and her body was exposed in plain view. 3 of the 5 bodies were located here. There were 2 upstream a ways, pushed into the water and weighted down with rocks. A third one was left on the bank in the tall grass. I assumed that he thought he was going to get caught. He saw somebody and dumped the body and ran because she didn't make it in the water. Well, it told us that he would dump more than one body at a site. So the next group that we found was on the Star Lake Road. There were also 6 bodies there. I believe most of them were asphyxiation, at least the ones that were still bodies when we found them. The rest were skeletal remains, so it was pretty difficult to establish any cause of death.
Every member of this county, the state of Washington, the United States, including the state of Hawaii and Canada, were aware of these murders and wondering when we were going to catch the killer.
It's a sad situation. There's somebody's daughter, sister, granddaughter, what have you. And you have to sympathize with their families. Once you're involved with it and see what it's done to the families and the misery it's caused, you can't let go. You gotta keep going. You gotta catch them. It's gotta be stopped. We felt strongly that he was from the area, not too far away. He probably lived within 3 or 4 miles from at least the bodies that we were aware of at that time.
Well, this roadway is consistent with many of Ridgway's sites where he, discarded the bodies of the victims. For example, if you look this way, you'll see a curve, okay? If you look the other way, you see another curve. He's dropping most of his the bodies during the late hours or early morning hours where it's dark. He can see the headlight of any approaching car on either direction, which gave him time to conceal himself and make his car look like it was just an abandoned car. So this is a major part of his MO in discarding the remains of the victims. The victims were found in wooded, isolated areas, generally by a hiker or a fisherman or a hunter, and they would call in the find. Then we would launch the task force to set up a perimeter and then process into the scene. We would line up, and under the supervision of detectives, we would clip every blade of grass, every branch, looking for any hairs, fibers, or anything else that might be of investigative value. For example, if there was a bird nest in a tree, if we could climb up and recover the bird nest, we would. If we couldn't, we'd cut the tree down, looking for hairs and fibers that birds may have collected to build their nest and help guide us towards confirming the identity of a suspect.
It didn't take us long to figure out that it was one person doing it, obviously.
As you're probably aware, history and statistics show that most people are killed by somebody they know. But when you have a stranger on stranger murder, it compounds the investigation in ways you can only imagine. His victimology was not consistent with other serial killers like Ted Bundy. The youngest victim was 15 for Ridgway. The oldest one was 37. They were from different races. There just didn't seem to be any commonality between the victims regarding their appearance and ages.
The victims told us a lot, just who they were and where they were taken from, and the time between their bodies being discovered and the time that they were taken.
The first bodies were identified. Their bodies were whole. The reporters were doing their best to do a good job reporting that. However, sometimes they like to play detectives themselves. In this case, Gary Ridgway, he watched all the news reports on his case, and after a certain media outlet voiced the possibility that trace evidence might be found on the clothing or jewelry, etc., of a victim, the bodies then found after that point in time had no clothing, no jewelry, and they were placed in a hidden place after being killed, and eventually they become just skeletal remains, which made the case even harder to solve because we didn't have a starting point until we got the victims identified.
Every time somebody would make a statement about so many victims are in this area and that area, he'd change. He'd go from South Seattle to North Seattle, or to Enumclaw, or out on Highway 90, or I-90 to dump his victims.
And almost every victim in the case, other than the original ones, were identified through their dental charts, which created another problem for us, is finding all the teeth. The teeth would be scattered all over the area because of animal activity, and we had to find those teeth so dental charts could be sought and possibly identify the victim. The task force investigators were spending a lot of time on bone finds. We would launch the whole entire task force and spend a lot of investigative time only to find out at the end that it was an animal bone. We would collect all the bones that we could find and then dispose of those bones so that they wouldn't be reported to us again. We were investigating hundreds of suspects. And fortunately, we had a mechanism that we were able to develop that we could clear people. We had some victims that we knew almost to the minute when they disappeared. And if we could put a suspect out of area at the time these women were disappeared and were killed, we could eliminate it because the evidence at the crime scenes indicated we were looking for one suspect, and of course we always had to be conscious of a possible copycat involved. We wondered, what was there about our suspect that the victims felt comfortable enough to get into the vehicle with him? What was happening? Okay. We were concerned that it might be somebody in uniform, police officer, military, somebody that people would just naturally feel comfortable with or trust. That was another avenue that we had to follow up, and with the help of the FBI, we looked at every person in the military, all branches, that were transferred in and out of the area during relevant time periods, okay? And we were able to clear them all. The answer was that it wasn't a police officer, it wasn't anybody in uniform. Gary Ridgway, he was tipped off by a boyfriend of one of the victims. He saw her get into this pickup truck. He was trying to go to her rescue, but he couldn't because he got stopped at an electrical signal light. So when he couldn't find her and he was scared for her safety, he sought her father, and they started checking the area. And then they checked this one residential area, and there was a pickup truck parked in a driveway that he thought was the truck, and it turned out to be Gary Ridgway's house. What was interesting was some of the trace evidence found with the remains. We found evidence of a green trilobal fiber associated with the carpet you find in houses. We had contacted a young couple who lived in the garage, which had been modified into a living quarters, who rented it. And they showed us photographs that they had taken inside the house that showed that it had a green trilobal type carpet in there.
We served search warrants on his place of employment. We served search warrants on his house.
I saw Ridgway at the house. He's smug, you know, he's pretty positive we're not going to find anything in his house. And his mother was there, and she was screaming and hollering that we had the wrong guy and so on and so forth. But I actually poked Ridgway on the chest, and I told him I knew he was the killer, and that we would get him one of these days. And we found no remnant or anything of that carpet. It had all been removed, replaced. And even the vacuum cleaner didn't reveal anything that helped us. He had really cleaned up the place. So that the fibers, as it turned out, the only purpose that they really showed was that some of the victims had been in the same environment before or after they were killed. We took the saliva sample from him for future DNA processing. The evidence that we had at that time, none of it would stand alone as far as getting him convicted, but it was leading us in the right direction. Then we started zeroing in on Ridgway himself. We started looking for other reports of assault on women by a person who matched Gary Ridgway's description. The clerical personnel were going through all the records, and they found a report showing that Gary Ridgway had assaulted or attempted to assault a woman who escaped. So then we started looking for her. We found her in Las Vegas, Nevada. And we took down a photograph lineup with Ridgway's picture in there, and she positively identified Gary Ridgway as the person who tried to abduct her. And that was really exciting to all the investigators, okay?
We did a timeline on him. We had every day that he'd work, and he worked on 3 different shifts. Every single body coincided with time off that he had, except for one. But then when we looked closer, he was on vacation. We could place him at every single body site from talking to other people. He had a wife, and he would take her out and show her the dump sites, or he didn't tell her that was a dump site, but he would take her there.
However, with the information we had, we took that to the prosecutor, who informed us that we had enough to charge, just didn't have enough to convict. Okay. So at that point in time, we knew where Ridgway was all the time. Even though we couldn't arrest him, we wanted to make sure he didn't get another victim, kill another person. Any police officer who has any experience in interviewing and interrogating people, they look for psychological things that gives them direction. What's the next question they want to ask, for example? Do they look down? Do they look up? Do they look away? Are they perspiring? Are they excessive blinking? Their body language is a real important thing to any of us who do any type of criminal investigation interviews. In Ridgway's case, his smirk, his interest in what we were doing. When I say interest, not what he was verbalizing, but how he was watching everything we were doing. And that was a real key to me to what I believe that he felt that he could get away with it. See, like, go ahead and look there. You're not going to find anything. Being a detective is like a mind game between you and the bad guy, okay? You're trying to figure out how he thinks and why he does things. He's trying to figure out how to cover those things so you don't find out. So you have to look at everything the person says or doesn't say and what his body language is telling you.
Well, number one, the sheer volume of interviews and paperwork, and it was unbelievable. And we were getting tips in constantly.
Fact is, one victim would have been too much. But the challenge that we as investigators in the department had was astronomical. We knew we were in for a long run. We needed to get trace evidence that was absolutely convincing, and that was DNA. Of course, when we started the investigation, DNA was just coming on the scene in the United States. And the thing that we finally got Ridgway on, the DNA, had been submitted 2, 3, 4 times previous for processing, but it kept coming back inconclusive. It wasn't until 2001 we got a positive hit on him, and that's when the arrest was made and he was charged. In my mind, I knew that his apprehension and solving the case was inevitable. I did not have any doubt, based on my experience, that Ridgway was our killer. So it was nice to know I was right.
I felt a relief. We had known for 20 years that it was him. Nothing we could do about it until we got the DNA.
Gary Ridgway's attorney contacted the prosecutor and asked the prosecutor if he would agree to waive the death penalty in exchange for a complete confession on all the women that he killed in the King County jurisdiction. And because we only had him on 3 or 4 cases with the DNA, okay? And certainly enough for the death penalty, for the prosecutor to seek the death penalty on him. But we would have still had 44, 45 families without closure. So the agreement was made between the prosecutor and the defense attorney that if he confessed all of them he killed with supporting evidence, he couldn't just claim to kill somebody without giving us something more to show that he killed them. And that was accomplished. Okay.
We were able to identify other cases that Ridgway was responsible for, but they were in different jurisdictions. We didn't have the authority to charge him with those.
When you have so many victims and so many families wondering what's going to happen, you can't avoid feeling the pain that the families are going through. And you want to work as hard as you can to get the person who's caused that pain. We all felt the same way. We wanted to show the families that we cared. Well,
I suppose after the first 2 or 3, it gets pretty easy after that. You kind of lose your moral sense of being. And he professed to be a Christian. I don't know, maybe he felt he was doing the will of God. Who knows? He said he had sex with the bodies. Now, we were unaware of that until he told us. We didn't know. No way to tell.
Well, it was a number of victims that he killed. In our jurisdiction alone, it was 48. And that's the magnitude of the investigation was what made him the worst killer. And each victim was manually strangulated. And the fact that he admitted to the pleasure he sought out of watching the life seep out of each of the bodies, I feel that is horrific. And if any person ever deserved a death penalty, it was Gary Ridgway.
Ridgway pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated murder in the first degree in 2003. 8 years later, he pleaded guilty to his 49th murder. He is serving a life sentence in Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. He will never be released. Homicide detective Robert LaMoria died in 2024. He was 83. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the world's most evil killers, Gary Ridgway. For more content like this, drop a like below and hit that subscribe button. Make sure to tell us in the comments which killer you'd like to see next. I'm Nick from True Crime Uncut. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.